us. And in the same way, what God does through Jesus back then, He now does it through us, but only through the liturgy. So these things we read about in the Scriptures are not just something that happened long ago, and they're nice history, and we can learn this or that about them, but they actually are events that are still occurring that we become part of, and we become part of them in the liturgy. And so we see how the liturgical year helps us to know that. Another way in which the liturgy and the Scriptures are connected is we can see it in how the church chooses the readings in the liturgy. A great example is the first Sunday of Lent. The first reading is from Genesis. It's about the fall of Adam and Eve. It's about how Adam and Eve were tempted by the devil, and they fell. The gospel reading is about the temptation in the desert. It's the reading I just did earlier about how Jesus was tempted by the devil and resisted it. And so by putting those two passages together, because remember, if you just pick up this Bible with no knowledge of Christianity or anything about it, you have no way of seeing any connection necessarily between one passage and another. You're going blind. But the church in the liturgy puts these two passages together to say, wait a minute, here's Adam, he's getting tempted by the devil and he falls. Here's Jesus, he's getting tempted by the devil and he doesn't fall. Hey, maybe there's a connection here. And then, because the church knows how slow we can be, it basically gives us the answer in the second reading. And the second reading on that day is from Romans 5, in which Paul writes, "Well then, sin entered the world through one man, and through sin death. And thus death has spread through the whole human race because everyone has sinned. Sin existed in the world long before the law was given. There was no law, and so no one could be accused of the sin of lawbreaking. Yet death reigned over all from Adam to Moses, even though their sin, unlike that of Adam, was not a matter of breaking the law." But then Paul says, Adam prefigured the one to come. And the word prefigured there is actually the Greek word that means type. Adam was the type of the one who is to come. But the gift itself considerably outweighed the fall. If it is certain that through one man's fall so many died, it is even more certain that divine grace, coming through one man, Jesus Christ, came to so many as an abundant free gift. The results of the gift also outweigh the results of one man's sin. For after one single fall came judgment with a verdict of condemnation. Now after many falls come grace with its verdict of acquittal. So we see that Adam is a type of the one who is to come. Paul is saying Jesus is the new Adam. If we live in the first Adam, we're going to end up just like him. We're going to fall to the devil. We have no chance. But if we live in the new Adam, we can be like Jesus, who resisted the devil, who overcame it. And through His grace, through His power, we can also overcome the power of the devil. And so we see all of that. I mean, how many, probably most of us, I don't know about you, but when I'm at Mass, often my thoughts are, I wish my kid would stop fidgeting, I wish this one would stop screaming, what am I going to do later today? Things like that. But really, it's amazing what's being proclaimed every time you go to Mass. That's just one example. But you see how these readings are put together. That is how we get to know the Bible. That is the primary way. It's not through necessarily doing Bible studies at home or in a small group or anything like that, not to disparage those things, but the first place and the privileged place for learning the Bible is in the liturgy. And we see how basically it's like a Bible study happening in front of us whenever we go to Mass. Okay, so basically, to sum it all up, a lot of people know the Bible today. And a lot of Catholics, I've found, are very intimidated by that fact. They might have a brother-in-law or a cousin or something who's a fundamentalist, and they'll start talking about something, and that guy will say, well, Amos 5:3 says, and then they'll quote some passage, and you'll just be like, the Gospels are about Jesus, I know that. I mean, you just feel like you're just completely not able to defend the faith from the Scriptures like they do. Or you might run, if you're in a college setting, you'll get some professor. I took a class, my undergrad was at a public university in Ohio, and I took a class called Christianity, Sexuality, and Ethics. Sounds like a gret course, except for it was taught by a gay atheist who hated Christianity. So it was quite the learning experience. But you can, especially in a college, you can get very intimidated by scripture scholars who they clearly know, oh, well, you know, Isaiah is actually, there's 3 different parts of Isaiah. It was actually written over this amount of time, and what he really meant was this. And you're just like, you know, I thought Isaiah was a prophet. I don't know what you're talking about. But I would say that Catholics who go to the liturgy regularly, who go to Mass on at least every Sunday, maybe even every day, they are best equipped to really know what the Bible means, what it says. And so when people ask me, how can I know the Bible better? What's the best way? I always say, go to Mass. Go to Mass as often as you can. And so if you want to be a real scripture scholar, if you want to be a true Bible Christian, then go to the liturgy. Go to Mass as often as possible. Thank you. Any questions? Okay.
Again, we have time for questions in a minute, but again, thank you, Eric, for coming tonight. And just a quick heads up for next week. Again, it will be Father Matt giving an encore. So he'll be speaking on silence and about, I think Father Matt's probably one of the only people who can manage to give a talk on not being quiet. But he'll be doing that. And then again, next week will be Father Phil Hurley speaking on living out the Eucharist. And so if you have any questions for Eric, please stick around, ask questions, discuss, have another drink. Thank you.
Anybody want to ask any questions? Any burning question? Anybody have? Anything? Come on, somebody's got to have at least one.
Come on, you guys have to have one over there, right?
If they were asking each other questions during the talk, they got to have one now. Nothing? Okay. Well, feel free to come up to me afterwards. Oh, yes.
I'll ask you one.
Okay, great.
You talked about, you know, the Bible Christians, the ones that can recite all the verses, and I currently know one. So I feel like I've grown up all my life Catholic, and I cannot quote scripture, and I kind of feel like I should be able to, and I don't know like how to defend myself about that. So how do you respond to, like, I love going to Mass, and I love listening to the homilies because they can make, depending on the priest you have, can relate it to current day,
right,
so that you can understand what the words mean to you right now. But how do you respond when somebody quotes the scripture right back to you and you have no response to that?
Right, and that's a great question. You know, I wasn't actually a very good evangelical because I was terrible at memorization. We were in all these groups, and I was in Campus Crusade for Christ, and I was in Navigators, and we were supposed to memorize these scripture passages, and I was just terrible at it. That's probably I failed out. That's why they made me a Catholic, maybe. But seriously, like my brother-in-law, he's a fundamentalist, and he's really big into like the 7-day creation, and you know, if you don't believe that, you're probably not a Christian, and you know, he and I will go back and forth. But it's a real issue. I think the best thing to do, typically, is to, I don't like getting into discussions about a specific passage. For example, if a Protestant Christian fundamentalist comes up to me and he will be talking about, like, what about, you know, some specific passage about how Paul said we're saved through faith, and he'll start talking about how we're saved through faith alone and all that. Now, there is a place for discussing with them the specifics of that passage, why they're misinterpreting it, and things like that. But really, you do have to have a certain high-level knowledge of the Bible in order to do that. What I think is more important is to take a step back. Try to have them take a step back. To talk about, okay, you believe the Bible is true, it's inspired, you know, we agree with you on that, you believe it's from God, that God was one of the authors of it, and all that. But then you can take a step back and say, where did we get the Bible? Where did it come from? How do you know which books are in the Bible and which are not? I mean, you can ask, okay, this book is inspired, right? Like, yeah. It's like, well, what about the table of contents? How did that come about? And so by doing that, by taking a step back and saying, well, how do you get the table of contents? Then you start discussing the need and the role of the church. There's nowhere in here that says which books should be in here. And obviously, if it did, that's a circular argument anyway. And so a lot of times what I like to do is try to take a step back and say, okay, if we're going to use this as our measure and standard, that we both agree is true, that anything in here properly interpreted is true, well then let's talk about where this came from. Because then the Protestant starts having problems. And I had a real problem with this when I was Protestant, and it's still true today for any Protestant, is that how can you trust what's in there? Because if you look at the history of how the Bible came to be, specifically the New Testament, you see there was debate and discussion for 400 years. It wasn't like overnight, as soon as Paul died or Peter died, boom, now we have the 27 books and it's all set up for us. No. There was some Christian churches in the 2nd century reading from some books and some reading from other books, and there was a certain common, about 22 of the books were basically non-debatable. But there was about 5 that made it, and about 5 or 10 or 15 that didn't make it, that were debated. Some Christians thought, no, this should be in the Bible, some didn't. It wasn't until the church, when the bishops got together at a few councils, they came together and said, okay, which books are inspired, which books are in the Bible? And so your fundamentalist Christian has the Catholic Church to thank for the fact that they even have the Bible. So I think if you take a step back, you don't have to know every detail of history. It's good to know, some of that. But just to say, how can you even trust that these are the books? Because they say, well, God inspired these books. Well, how do you know which books? And then you have the role of the church. And that then leads in a whole discussion of the role of the church throughout Christian history. Because then you can start talking about, well, how do you know, why do you believe, most Protestant Christians believe, for example, the Nicene Creed, that, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, the divine and human natures of Jesus. Well, how did you come to that? And all those things were developed over time by the Catholic Church through what the Scriptures say, but it wasn't just overnight that all of a sudden in 100 AD they had everything all laid out for them. So that would be my suggestion. And, read the Bible a lot.